Thank you, Arthur. Let us start. We will have this session in a format of discussions, and we'll have one participant with slides, and then we'll ask questions and discuss it. I recommend people to listen, and presentations without slides are always interesting. I'll introduce partners of our expert panel. We have Akop Kargaminyan, lead Principal Bank of Natural Resources, European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, Jane Johin, Corporate Consultant, SRK Consulting, Georgi Freiman, Chair of Executive Committee Panel, Sergei Sidorkin, Deputy Director for Social Economic Project, IMC Mountain, and Asim Kirnibaeva, Managing Director, Head of Directorate of Green and Social Initiatives. Ayana Nichayeva would not be able to join, but her colleague Katya Gorbatyuk, CIS, Central Asia Sustainable Finance Committee, London Stock Exchange, will also be with us. So, for the beginning, let me say a couple introductory remarks to set the framework. I said it in the previous session where we can get funds for decarbonization, and welcome to the fourth session. The session has started, and we are going to discuss how this agenda can be funded, where we can get these funds, and how it can be done. And I would like to note one thing that I keep on repeating for many years. ESG is not a revolution, is not a flight to space. It's not that something happened all over the globe, but we are trying to implement it. ESG is about risks and money and about the capital markets. It's about on how we can consider the factors capable to result into losses of funds or opportunities to gain more. ESG means funds, risks, and capital markets. Decarbonization that we discussed at the previous session, carbon neutrality, is just a part of this risk, a part of the first letter E, which is about ecology. So the role of non-environmental factors in ESG is very important. I would say we have social factors, corporate governance factors, again, even more importance for investors in a process of decision making. Who should be invested the funds, for which rate and for which period? I would like to address to Sergei. Could you please share on the examples on the key non-environmental factors in ESG agenda important for mining sector? And could you please specialize the role of these factors in investment assessment? Good evening, distinguished colleagues. I'm from NC Montan, and I'll be talking about forgotten part of ESG agenda. We are going to talk about non-environmental factors and their role. The first thesis I'm going to start with is that currently, very often, and we have seen it in the agenda of this event today, the whole variety of ESG aspects and ESG topics is connected to the issues of environment protection and decarbonization issues. It is a focus which is related to media distortion, but multiple opinion polls, various geography, various composition of participants always shown that the majority of respondents believe environmental issues the most important in the ESG agenda. Why it is so? I believe that first of all it is related to conjuncture ideas. It is a response of business to the innovations in the regulation appeared in the most recent years. Here we are talking about of pushing subsoil users to decarbonize, and to do energy transition. These are the aspects which are in the focus of attention of regulation, and as a reaction we are discussing these issues. Actually, the concept of a responsible investing and ESG agenda is much wider, and I would like to present 5 arguments why I believe these 2 additional letters SAG should not be forgotten, and I believe in the future their role will increase even more. Despite the fact that abbreviation provides for consideration of 3 factors in the same linear prospect, actually they are in hierarchy relations. The thing is that managerial factors have indirect impact on the topic of effects and risk in other spheres. In social and environmental sphere, it's not something new. Statistical surveys on the connection of the company's productivity with ESG metrics keep on demonstrating the key role of managerial factors. The quality of management in the factor identifies its financial outcomes. So, for the funds which are used systematically the metrics in the forecast of financial outcomes, they do not avoid and do not forget about this ESG component. It is important, and it will keep its importance. When we are talking about risks, the majority of investment analysts, auditors, and assessors know very well about the significant importance of non-environmental risks. Actually, environmental risk and environmental topics are integrated into current operational activities. In this sense, negative aspects and risk in some cases are possible to forecast. And when we are talking about political and social risk related to protest mood, they are difficult to forecast, but in terms of the impact, they can absolutely stop the entity or investment project. On this slide, you see the example of annual assessment of top 10 risk for mining that is produced by Ernst & Young, and risk related to social license for activity were rated as first. Actually, we are talking about the risk of social protest as most important for mining sector. This slide illustrates that environment is not the biggest component of the risks. The third argument, the role of these 3 aspects in the philosophy of business, in operational outcomes and the outcomes the business strives to achieve. We have to agree that environmental topics, which is imposed on society as negative effects, the business has to control, but the key contribution to business is creation added value, but also other aspects are in direct focus of any business interested in the growth of value it creates for the society, but not only in the restriction of negative effects. We can talk long about it, and I will stop it, and I hope that we'll turn to this question back in our discussion. The 4th argument, after numerous opinions polls, including the foundations oriented to long-term investments, here I see the example of survey of pension funds. Everybody says that the role of social factors will increase in far remote prospects. This is related to the key aspects, and I would like to raise one, the most important. Intellectualization would result to the increased role of intellectual assets, and in this regard, social and managerial factors will preserve its role and increase it. And it is accompanied with the growth of special markets oriented on the resolution of those tasks. I'm talking about social tasks, including social bonds and other metrics allowing the investors to reach understanding in this sphere. And the last argument I would like to talk about is The thing that restricts active application of social and managerial factors in the assessment is the complexity of measurement and low level of confidence in these measurements. Actually, these issues are difficult to measure directly. How we can assess the quality of management? And at the same time, in the most recent years, we observe significant efforts in this regards. We see the appearance of new standards and they get synchronized. And I think that in coming 15 years we'll reach consensus on measurement of these aspects, and the assessments will gain more confidence that would allow businesses and companies to use them. These are the key aspects I would like to cover, and I am prepared to respond to your questions. Thank you very much, Sergey. As a question to all the experts, could you please express your opinion? Actually, the question is philosophical a little bit. Why do you believe responsible investment is so widespread? Is it a modern trend, or does it bring real benefits that can be measured in money, or it is a temporary kind of trend? Ekaterina, we can hear you, but we have turned to another question and then we'll come back to you. Good afternoon. Actually, it's a philosophical question. It seems to me that both factors have played its role. First, we have countries' commitment under Paris Agreement on reduction of emissions. Actually, each country has its own objectives, so it's not. And actually, we have to adjust and we have to transform all the enterprises and the economy in general, and that would have significant economic benefits, and energy efficiency of the GDP will decrease with that, especially if we are talking about some private examples, and profits can be great gained from energy efficiency projects or ESCA contractors. Actually, we can have a lot of factors, and it's not a short-term measure. And we'll ask investors, what actually do you think about it? Good afternoon, colleague.
I would agree with Asil here. It's a set of factors. And initially, probably, it was kind of a trendy, but within times it turned into advanced market practices, and advanced companies began to use these practices in their operation. And since recent times, we've been seeing that, for example, LSE starting from 2024 will require from companies that are willing to be listed to disclose risks relating to, for instance, climate changes. Therefore, to answer your question, I'd say it is a combination of different factors. So we may conclude that it's no longer kind of a trendy, it's a reality. Ekaterina, you are with us, and hopefully you are able to hear us. I have a question. We've heard that from one hand we have social and managerial factors are important for investors, and on the other hand, it's no longer payment or kind of reflection of trends. And LSE is part, London Stock Exchange is part of the process. So what are your orientation?
Other English speakers, I'll switch to English if you don't mind. And firstly, I really enjoyed Sergey's presentation and how he highlighted the fact that ESG is becoming mainstream. But what does it mean for ESG to be placed in the center of decision making? And here I'd like to share a few practical recommendations. Well, first, it's worth remembering the direction of travel of corporate governance, that directors owe their duty to the company itself, and that duty is to ensure its long-term success and viability. And today, this long-term success and viability is directly linked to the company's environmental and social outcomes. So what does it translate to in terms of some of the building blocks of corporate governance? The first one is a well-informed board. And I would say the importance here is to be able to inform the board properly about the both positive and negative impacts of the company's activities collected from all the corners of the organization on an ongoing basis, because otherwise it won't be possible to have an informed discussion at the board level. The second one is the expertise present at the board level to be able to ask the right questions and to challenge the executive team. And then there has to be this knowledge on how to prioritize all these factors, how to assess them for materiality, and how to consider them in decision making. And then thirdly, it's the board agenda and how it's crafted. It needs to be at the outset inclusive of all these issues, of all the social concerns and environmental concerns and all the stakeholder related issues. And rather than a separate agenda item, it has to be embedded in all the board decisions and discussions. And to ensure accountability, there needs to be some sort of a connection to the top executive compensation in order to align incentives here. So that's how I would say the board can become an effective decision maker, and that's what the investor focus is currently on.
Thank you, Katya. I will also switch somehow to English, but just started in Russian in order to avoid this putting on, putting out the headphones. Continuing that you're online, the next question also will go to you. From your point of view and from the experience in those regions which you are responsible for, CIS, Central Asia, Russia, etc., what is the nature in the difference between, let's name, ESG leading companies and ESG lagging companies? Jane, thank you for idea for that question. What is the real difference? And also the difference in terms of their access to finance?
Absolutely, an excellent question. And I would say that the biggest single factor is the quality of the company's engagement with its investors and how the company views this engagement, whether the company sees it as a cost, as an extra kind of work stream, or whether the company sees it as a strategic opportunity. And by the way, that's the direction of travel of corporate reporting, because previously it was there to convey the investment case, the investment story, and that's unchanged. But increasingly it's becoming a strategic tool. And how does it become a strategic tool? It's in creating this two-way stream of communications, continuously considering investor feedback, and importantly using it as a basis for board discussions, decisions, and then reporting on the progress towards achieving these new objectives. And I would say the single biggest obstacle that I've seen in this region is the desire to issue this perfect report, because this perfection invariably comes at the expense of transparency. Rather than seeking to issue this perfect glowing report, companies should share what kind of lessons they're learning on this very, very difficult journey and all the challenges that they're facing, and sharing with the rest of the community how they're addressing these challenges. And then perhaps something that's non-region specific, but something to be aware of and watch out for, because today it's all about integrated thinking. ESG is not a side activity, and therefore when you issue a separate sustainability report, it sends a signal that it may still be a side activity for a company. And therefore think in an integrated way, think integrated reporting, and that's how you project the message that for you it's very much part and central to the decision making.
Thank you, Katya. Окей, для того, чтобы двигаться дальше, интересно.
So that we can move on, we would be curious to hear from those who are actually investors. We understand how the stock exchange thinks and those who are going to use it. But what about investors? So my question is actually to investors. You represent international development institution. You are actually one of the largest investors into Kazakhstan and Central Asian region in general. From your standpoint, what makes sense? What is crucial for potential investee from as ESG, where you look, and what is your emphasis? Thank you, Victor. If you allow me, move, before I answer your question, let me add a couple of words about EBRD. We have been operational in Kazakhstan starting from 1993. We are one of the largest investors in the region, investing into almost all sectors of economy, including mining, which plays the key role for us. In 2021, we have invested 18 projects with 600 billion plus US dollars in all sectors, including mining. As for investments and how we look into ESG aspects, no doubt it's one of the crucial issues for us, which we carefully study in terms of with the prospective investments. We give a great attention to environmental issues and how a project may impact the environment. We also look into the social implications of specific projects and how a social situation in the region may be impacted. And so these issues are the key priorities for us. Before cooperation is established, we analyze these factors in combination, and EBRD has actually 10 of them, covering environmental aspects, social aspects, biodiversity, land acquisition, communication, stakeholder engagement, and of course, at the beginning of our cooperation, not every client is compliant with these principles or able to become compliant. But as a development institution, we continue to work with the companies to make sure that within times their operation is more compliant with these requirements. So before we start, we prepare an environmental and social actions plan together with the clients, which is subject to implementation during the periods of our collaboration. Why is it crucial for EBRD? Because transition to the green economy for the bank is one of the foundations, one of the basis to improve competitiveness and to develop private sector. That's it. If we look a bit deeper into this issue, I know that in recent years, you made changes in your mandate, and you're no longer able to invest into certain segments in mining, such as coal production. Are there any projects in mining sector which may attract your interest in Kazakhstan as investor? Indeed, like I mentioned earlier, the mining sector plays a crucial role for us. You're right saying that, for example, we are not allowed to finance the coal mining companies and uranium production companies, unfortunately. It is a big issue with the projects that relate to transition to a green economy, which includes copper, rare earth metals, nickel, and the priority for us is to find opportunities to finance these subsectors, projects in these subsectors. Let me also add that we establish cooperation with the mining sector in two areas or through two instruments. We finance projects through a credit line, and the second approach is a so-called technical transaction, where we, together with our clients, look into a possibility to develop a new project or a new technology to find these R&D works or studies, and with successful outcome and positive environmental impact, we offer funding for the future. Thank you. We will discuss risks as well a bit later. And I will have a follow-up question on methodology. But my question goes to ASEM now. ASEM represents one of the largest development institutions in the region. And I would be curious to hear from you as an ADB in the context of SDG in terms of projects for funding. Good afternoon, dear participants of the forum. I'm happy to welcome you all at MINEX Kazakhstan 2022. Despite the fact that mining sector is an important source of minerals for the globe, we still have to face certain implications as a result of the mining sector operation. My colleague from EBRD actually mentioned some of the risks relating to financing of the projects in the mining sector. But it also requires enhanced verification of environmental impact when we make a decision on financing, but we also look at another components such as background of a client and so on. We have established a set of requirements for the projects subject to financing, and all these projects are subject to preliminary social economic impact in compliance with this list of requirements, after which we make a decision on financing.
In our portfolio, we have coal projects, and we do not reject them, but we treat these projects very carefully. We implement ESG principles and understand that these projects need to be adopted to BATs in the future. And during social and environmental assessments of the company has to consider the entire list of risks and the implications that can be caused by implementation of the project, and within ESG assessment they apply the measures on mitigation of risks and negative impacts that include forecasting and prevention or minimization or reduction of risks and the impact if they are unpreventable. And after minimization of the risks and impacts, we observe mitigation of the consequences, and if they are perceived, they need to be compensated. The company also should start developing the plan of risk and the impact mitigation at very early stages of project cycle to prevent possible risks and impacts. And we recommend the participants from this area and specialist of social environmental issues into the team developing the feasibility study. Also, the company has to assess the nature and the sources of air pollution, and they should also include assessment of gross release of greenhouse gases. And this assessment technically and financially should be feasible. The most important documents guaranteeing compliance with the norms is certificate of compliance of ESO. We consider a certified system of environment protection according to international standard 914 that include management and OXAS 18001, the system of management of professional safety. So we focus clients on application of best available practices and BATs. Thank you. Thank you very much. Asim, was my understanding correct that you have amended to fund the projects in the sphere of mining sector in Kazakhstan and in the region, but at the same time you establish ESG requirements to potential clients and recipients? It's absolutely true. Okay, thank you very much. And maybe the next question will be addressed to Asil. If we are talking about Kazakhstani companies based on the experience of Green Finance Center, the center is actually in the center of the process. What mining companies have to do to get funding from renowned investor considering ESG agenda, and I would be thankful if you explain how taxonomy can help companies. I'll start with the second question with regard of taxonomy. Late last year, taxonomy and classifier of green project was approved, and in February this year, the resolutions on subsidizing of interest rates for green loans have been approved, as well as guaranteeing of green bonds also have been approved. That activities come through financial operator Zamu, and our idea was to support green project. If we are talking about mining sector, for bigger companies, we can operate with bigger companies with ERG if they implement green projects, if they have established the inner system, if they have green strategy, environmental strategy, green development strategy. And in this case, it will be easier to work with the bigger companies. And we prepare them to attracting green funding through green obligations or loans. And if we are talking about juniors who are less prepared than bigger players, we have an instrument, sustainability linked bonds and obligation bonds related to sustainable development or transitional bonds. The center can also help with the development of necessary document and transformation of business, ESG screening of projects, ESG screening of company, and in the future we can prepare the frameworks or internal strategies for sustainable funding attracting. We have to mention that junior companies in the mining sector should set certain objectives of transformation, considering reduction of emissions, considering energy consumption and dirty emission, pollutants and greenhouse gas emissions. They have to set optimistic KPIs or indicators that they plan to achieve maybe in short-term and in long-term periods. The strategy can last until 2050 and 2060, considering the doctrine of carbon neutrality. But at the same time, they can develop clear and very visible horizons up to 2035, like implementation of electricity production on renewables, on transition to the gas as a source of energy. These are the mechanisms of traditions that we can propose to companies that will prepare the companies to attracting funding through multilateral development bank or attracting green funding through at the markets of green capital through stock exchange at Astana International Exchange at IFSC. They provide simplified rules for junior companies for the company's listing. They provide less requirements and attracting funds. And in Kazakhstan, they have also the rules on attracting sustainable funding. And that is why I believe that the access to capital markets will be wider for this polluting sector as mining industry. You have touched upon a very important aspect. When we are talking about mining sector, we are talking about bigger companies. But for Kazakhstan, it is a critical problem as replenishment of resources and discovery of new promising deposits. And you can also find information that demand is critical and it is growing, and maybe the market will see the deficit because of the lack of significant discoveries. So the question about juniors is a very good one, and I would like to focus on and ask the same question to other participants, colleagues. When we are talking about juniors, Shane, the question is addressed to
juniors. This is very important subsector, I would say, to develop in Kazakhstan and in region as well. You're, let's say, in the field. You know, your company is working in the field. You know much more than me and many other participants about what are really key challenges for juniors and for other companies, but now we are talking about juniors. So the question is, from your point of view, what are key challenges for juniors in area of ESG in relation to our region? Not somewhere there in, I don't know, Australia or Africa, but here in the region.
I'll start off with juniors more generally, but can you hear me clearly? So with juniors, we find that all the standards and legislation and things that they have to comply with, they say it's like drinking from a fire hydrant. It's overwhelming. And when we work with juniors and helping them to get ready for investors and financing or planning a new project, we have to approach it in a more practical way. But one rule is, and Kachi used this term, ESG needs to flow through everything and through every decision. And really, every decision has to have ESG in. That's company decisions, project planning decisions, and operational decisions. And how do you do that? Well, number one, there's 6 key things to do. Number one is understand the setting. Have a very good map of your setting. Understand the people who are going to be affected, the land use that's going to be affected, the natural resources. What catchment are you in? What is sensitive in your environment? It's very simple. If you have a good map that everybody can use so everybody can get in their mind around it, the next thing is understanding what investors' expectations are and other stakeholders like downstream manufacturers, regulatory authorities, local communities, and then designing that project so that that footprint is as small as possible, including a carbon footprint. Modern projects need to be designed for net zero and Paris aligned. Designing for closure, designing for climate change. Those key things, if juniors can do that, and juniors with being small organizations, if they can build that into their operations, have a very good story to tell. They also have to think about, obviously, compliance with legislation, the spirit of legislation, and alignment with international standards. A lot of juniors and a lot of companies will say, I align with best practice. What is best practice? You've got to identify which standards you're aligning with specifically and make sure you're ticking those blocks. But a junior who's doing that, and we try to help them do that, is in a good position with investors and has a good story to tell. Yeah.
I like these practicalities in everything which you are telling about. You are trying to make it as practical as possible. Well, yeah, very good idea. And, you know, the question could be, Katya, probably to you as representative of London Stock Exchange. What are key difference in challenges in area of ESG between large mining companies and juniors from the investor's point of view? Or in other words, what companies could do better here in the region to attract financing, considering ESG agenda?
Well, I would start by acknowledging that the scale of resources available to a smaller company will be vastly different to the resources available to a large company, and you know, all the advisors it can deploy to you know, even to communicate with investors to issue this you know, perfect sustainability report. But there is still a lot that a small company can do, and in a way, you know, the small companies are in a better position to be more agile, more responsive to the changing environment. And I think that the single biggest thing to do here is to assign responsibility for ESG issues to the board level, you know, and you have to unpack this ESG, because I think that the better term here is sustainability, because it goes to the heart of long-term sustainability. And you have to assign board responsibilities to these topics. You have to be considering all the right topics at the board level, and you have to report on how you set your objectives, how all these factors are being considered in discussions, decisions, and how they translate into deliverables for management. And then how, you know, the board has to be responsible for the delivery on these objectives. So that's how kind of this new trend to issue a corporate purpose. This is, you know, a statement of purpose that's bigger than just financial value creation. This is how this process translates into something tangible. This is how it, you know, bears fruit. So I think the priority here is to match all these good statements and intentions with actions, and the action with tangible impact.
Okay, thank you, Katya. Я пытаюсь, чтобы это было не...
I'm trying to turn it to a discussion, not to a presentation, so I'm jumping from one panelist to another. Sergey, your vision of this issue is very interesting. What could you tell? You're based on your priorities. It seems to me that the question about juniors is good, as it allows us to show what is really new in ESG agenda. If we consider ESG framework as just a methodology for risk assessment or assessment of factors of a particular project or entity, we will not see much new. Let us be honest, social, political, environmental risk are always been considered 30, 40, and 50 years ago. In that sense, it is difficult to find something new, but at the same time, the concept itself of responsible investment is different. Actually, it covers the factors, the aspects of responsibilities that have been previously considered formally from the point of view of compliance with the requirements of regulators, like externalities, like charities, non-core activities. Now, all these three areas of activities are considered as a must, as unalienable part of an ordinary business of a company, and as a community, investors expect positive contribution of a company, but not formal execution of requirements. For these stimulating measures and incentives are established, giant capital markets are established in the form of green investment, social bonds, and these markets open significant opportunities for all the companies, respectively, upon their side. But it is theory. It is one aspect. This is what the colleagues have been saying. If a company, irrespective of its size, is prepared to get involved in this area and invest their resources and find the opportunities, I believe it will be able to do that. And it will become an additional tool for juniors to attract investments and to get some beneficial conditions, but it's theory. In practice, we have to admit that as for the moment, the expertise related to the access to the market is quite expensive and inaccessible for juniors, and I see that's a problem and significant field for the work. For many participants of the market, consultant, public organizations and authorities, so as to simplify the access to these resources and these opportunities for all the companies, and I believe it will happen in some future.
Yes, indeed. Let's move on and make a leap, not to turn this into discussion. Georgi, I have a question. You wanted to share with us your urgent need to use a framework classification of resources of the United Nations in order to move to green economy. Would you please explain to the companies participating in our events how this can help the mining companies in Kazakhstan and also investors into this sector? What is the value for them? I want to show you, I want to share a slide. Okay, it is a hot topic for Kazakhstan to use a framework classification. It would be helpful to have this slide. So Panen Experts Union that I lead within the last 6 years is dealing with introduction of international standards into geologic geomining sector in our country. During the latest 3 years, we actively interact with the European Economic Commission of the United Nations on the carrying Triska codes and classification that you see in this slide. Speaking of this scheme and the vertical X, environmental, social, big economy, is perfectly integrated into the topic of our discussion because it focuses on priorities offered by this classification. If we look into those in the globe who use it, we will immediately understand who and where they all are, because on the basis, because this is mostly applied in Scandinavian countries, and I think this comment speaks a lot, because everybody knows that efficiency in that region, including mining sector, geomining sector, is the highest. On the other hand, all 55 countries of the African Union made a decision that they should make use to a maximum extent of the framework classification to overcome a catastrophic colonial heritage. So if you take EX, the vertical X, all of these aspects used to be completely neglected, which resulted in a very challenging situation for the whole continent. Therefore, in Kazakhstan, we've been actively discussing this to make sure that at the government level, we could build on priorities using this particular system, which begin with social and environmental aspects. And because ACUN includes and covers any resources, not mining sector alone, it includes renewables, anthropogenic resources, and everything relating to any economic activity. So the scope of application is pretty wide. And if we look at development of CUN, we will clearly be able to see that the priorities and the trend overall curve of humanization with adoption of 13 SDGs, the concepts has been changed. So instead of going into project assessment, and Sergey was right saying that it used to be a social environmental component playing third and even lower role. And when we decided to step aside from the idea of revenue by all means, and now we are talking about mining, environmental sectors, it turns into more and more crucial elements and crucial aspects. We want to dig even deeper. Any company that, let's say, produces something, this classification and use of this classification, how it can help your rights in the green economy in particular, in order to show significance of the project. You don't need feasibility study indicators. You have to include into the scope the problems faced by mono towns, mono cities, faced during decades. And nowadays, these project indicators, which are submitted to those persons who are in charge, they are, but there are no benchmarking mechanisms. I wouldn't say that we ignore, but without this framework, there is no benchmarking instrument for comparison, given the combination of all indicators in terms of outcomes for the region, for community, for monocity, which allow you to make a decision to think about green investments. So it is kind of a tool that allows you to put together all elements, financial and so on, and compare all the projects and set priorities based on that. I wanted to follow up on that. It is a very interesting topic being actively debated. There are specific steps, and when we are talking about indicators and mechanisms for assessment and measuring ESG, there are two classical approaches. There is a set of indicators allowing you to assess some characteristics of the projects. The most popular one is GRI initiative, non-financial reporting on the basis of some cumulative indicators, which does not allow you to have a benchmarking between different indicators. You won't be able to see progress in environmental and regression in social, for example. It's also a concept of various capitals, which introduces a single evaluation system. And we have an integrated reporting system supported by GRI, by the way. It's where we are moving on. and more they look into assessment methodologies. We have capital investments, we have finance capital, intellectual capital, non-financial assets, which is also taken into balance. And what's new and what we have to learn to estimate includes the nature's capital, not only resources, reserves, but also ecosystems and how they are impacted negatively or positively. Social capital as a relationship system. And ultimately, after some time, if we use finance economic model at the moment for the project estimate, which has a limited set of indicators, capex, in fact, and also movement of funds, then this model will include changes in the balance of the nature capital as a result of companies' impact social capital, and they will be possible to compare all these projects. And at the national level, in the national accounts, they already have to reflect the environmental capital and human capital. It's well perceived, and it is an area, in fact, where we have to work a lot, including consultants. And I'm happy. Thank you for being honored with us, fair with us. In fact, we can spend hours to discuss this, but we have little time left. Let us touch upon the climate aspects. And Ekaterina, I want to address on you. In LSE, you have voluntary carbon initiative, as I remember. Would you please explain the idea behind it, and in 2 words and in 3 words, how it can help our mining companies to obtain financing through LSE in the context of ESG agenda? Thank you, Victor. As you know, LSE has a spectrum, a wide range of products and services to support green economy. However, voluntary carbon market is a new initiative which was launched in November and is intended to help corporations which move slower probably to a green economy, to help these companies and investors to finance the transition period through investing into different projects that generate dividends in the form of carbon credits. So our idea was to speed up access to the primary markets, to the capital, to green economy, and to provide investors with liquidity in the markets. This initiative, how is it integrated with the voluntary carbon market gold standard and so on? I think it's a novelty, but it's a side product. For the first time, it allows to have access to primary capital markets and opportunity for corporations to invest into these projects and to have dividends in the form of carbon credits. What are the first steps for the company to join this initiative? You should wait a little bit because the initiative was presented, but it's still being developed. In a couple of months, you will be able to participate in these projects. Thank you. I think many will be very much interested. And speaking of the climate change, EBRD has a CCG Action Plan initiative, Corporate Climate Governance Action Plan. As I understand, the bank wants when making a decision on financing, has to request the risks assessment by a company and to set up a risk management plan. So please explain us why it became important and what is inside, what a company is required, in fact. Indeed, the climate agenda in recent years plays a greater role for investment community, and we as a development institution, we pay a lot of attention to this factor. As you rightly noted, the bank is helping the clients to in development and implementation of low carbon strategy. In previous session, our colleague from Kazatomprom explained that Kazatomprom is developing its low carbon strategy, and we see that other companies from natural resources sector follow the same paths. When we make investment analysis, if it's in natural resources sector, we pay a lot of attention to the company's understanding and proper estimation of the risks. To what extent the risk mitigation approaches are incorporated into an overall company's strategy. Therefore, we give it special attention, and if the company or client has no understanding of how to proceed, we try to help with that. Some projects, for some projects, it is a must on certain credits and products. We can offer better interest rates and make money cheaper once intermediate results are achieved in terms of climate corporate governance and the way the company has to follow.
Thank you very much, and I am hinted that we have to close the session because it is a eternal topic and we can discuss a lot. Actually, we have borrowed time from technical break, and I propose that everyone who are interested in this topic, and the audience has increased during this session, please after the session approach to the panelists and ask your questions who are online. For them it is more difficult to address, but still you can find the contact details from the organizers, and it will be easy to find Katerina and Asim. And I'll close up because I have a lot of questions to discuss, but unfortunately the time is not sufficient. I would like to close the session with the following. Carbon neutrality in general and decarbonization in particular is not a thing of our future. It's already here, and today we have heard the representatives of financial structures and suppliers of the capital that these are the questions whether we want or not, whether we like or not, but the capital market pay attention to them. And if we would like to participate in the international trade and economy, if we would like to gain international funds, we have to pay our attention. And the remark is ESG and climate, they are not only about saving hedgehogs and birds, even it is required. It's about risks and money. If investors provide money in any form, shares, loans, and etc., they have to understand whether the company knows its non-financial risks that can prevent it from working and decrease its ability to cover the loans. And being an investor, they would like to understand what the company understands its risk and what it can do about them. So let us close with this remark because we have exceeded our time. Thank you, colleagues, for your participation, and I invite you to approach the panelists and ask your questions. Asim, Katerina, thank you for your being connected.